Violette1st, Bill's IKEA incident. Story for Lacey. Introduction. Hello and welcome back to another Violette1st story. This is a special story for my new friend Lacey. Short summary. Bill smashed up all the house furniture. Violette and the fam go to IKEA. However, she spends hours there, so Bill gets revenge. Plot. It is a balmy Saturday morning in Mount Airy, Maryland. A 52-year-old, Violette, is walking downstairs for breakfast. 1 minute later, Violette starts to cook breakfast. 4 minutes later, Lacey, Violette's 14-year-old adopted daughter, walks out of the bathroom, all ready for Saturday. A few seconds later, William, 17-year-old son, walks downstairs, eager for breakfast. A few minutes later, Lacey and William tuck into Violette's breakfast as the entire house shakes. 10 seconds later, Violette watches the basement door open. 6 seconds later, a 58-year-old, 473,348-pound Bill walks into the kitchen. A few seconds later, Bill screams for his daily breakfast smorgasbord. Violette then hands Bill a bowl of low-fat natural vanilla Greek yogurt topped with half a tablespoon of mixed nuts, mixed berries, 10 grams of hemp seeds and a small amount of honey drizzled on top. Violette then sprays a small dollop of her homemade low-fat no-sugar whipped cream on top and dusts it with whey protein powder. Bill then screams with pure anger as he hurls the bowl to the floor. 5 seconds later, Bill drags the fridge out to the living room. 1 minute later, Bill turns on Yo Gabba Gabba as he rips the fridge door off the fridge. Bill then starts shoving food down this throat. 10 minutes later, Violette, William, and Lacey walk outside. Violette then tells Bill they are going grocery shopping as she closes the front door. Bill then realizes he has the entire house to himself. 40 seconds later, Bill watches his wife's SUV speed off. Bill then texts a 30-megabyte Google Doc with his shopping list to Violette. A few seconds later, the 8,372-page document gets delivered. 10 seconds later, Bill sees Violette texted him he ain't getting any food. Bill then screams as he storms outside. A few minutes later, Bill starts smashing up all the furniture to get his anger out. Bill then laughs with glee as he smashes Violette's $185 cuckoo clock. 5 minutes later, Bill storms into Violette's office with a sledgehammer. 5 seconds later, Bill smashes Violette's desk and shelf into oblivion. 4 minutes later, Bill destroys Violette's office chair. 2 minutes later, Bill starts smashing up the kitchen. 10 minutes later, Bill starts smashing up the living room as Violette's SUV pulls up. 1 minute later, Violette screams like a banshee when she sees Bill smashing the couch up. Bill then eats the sledgehammer as Violette drops some soda onto the floor. 1 second later, it explodes as Lacey and William start bringing bags in. A few seconds later, Violette grabs the thickest and heaviest belt from her belt rack. 10 seconds later, Violette starts whipping Bill. A few seconds later, Bill screams and hollers in pain as he is being violently whipped. 2 minutes later, Bill screams as he screams swear words. Violette then starts whipping even harder for the cussing. 10 seconds later, Violette's belt snaps in half from the spanking. 10 seconds later, Violette sighs as she grabs her wallet. William and Lacey then walk to the living room. 4 seconds later, Violette says they are going to IKEA for new furniture. Bill then walks down to his basement bedroom. 1 minute later, Bill puts a guitar case into the SUV trunk. 15 seconds later, the Anderson family speeds off to the closest IKEA. 1 hour later, Violette pulls into the parking lot. 3 minutes later, Violette starts shopping with Lacey and William, as Bill goes to the IKEA restaurant with his case. A few seconds later, Bill gets into the line. 10 minutes later, Bill sits down with 7 orders of Swedish meatballs and 34 entire chocolate cakes. A few seconds later, Bill starts shoving food down his throat. Bill then starts shoving fistfuls of cake down his throat. 40 minutes later, Bill gets back into the line. 15 minutes later, Bill starts eating his smorgasbord of IKEA food. 6 minutes later, Bill finishes eating his meal of 4 of everything on the menu. 5 minutes later, Bill walks around the IKEA aimlessly with his guitar case. 20 minutes later, Bill spots Violette looking at wooden wall clocks. A few seconds later, Bill asks how much longer. Violette then tells Bill that it's going to be a few hours. 4 seconds later, Bill screams with pure anger as he storms off. Lacey then gulps as Bill runs away. 10 seconds later, Bill grabs a steel axe out of his rolls of fat. Bill then starts smashing the display furniture out of anger. 2 minutes later, Bill storms away. Bill then starts walking around. 1 hour later, Bill calls Violette. 1 minute later, Bill smashes a chair when told it is gonna be a couple hours. Bill then opens his guitar case. Meanwhile, Violette and her kids are testing chairs for the living room. 3 minutes later, Violette and Lacey put a box onto their third shopping trolley. 6 seconds later, the fire alarm goes off. Violette then sighs as she walks out with her kids. 3 minutes later, Lacey smells smoke. A few seconds later, Lacey sees a raging inferno. Violette, William, and Lacey then run for their lives past the flaming clocks. 2 minutes later, Violette calls Bill as she sprints outside. Violette then is told by Bill he is across the street at the Buffalo Wild Wings. 10 seconds later, Violette hears Bill cackling as she is hung up on. Violette then instantly knows Bill is up to something. 3 minutes later, a massive fire starts to engulf the IKEA as Bill walks out in a fire-resistant suit and holding a flamethrower. A few seconds later, 20 fire trucks arrive at the raging inferno IKEA. Violette then realizes Bill torched an IKEA to the ground because he had to wait to leave. A few seconds later, Bill screams to everyone, "I lit this IKEA on fire to teach my wife about wasting time in the IKEA, making me wait because I smashed the furniture and she had to get new furniture. Bleep you, Violette." Bill then smashes his flamethrower as he flips off the crowd. Violette then screams with pure anger as she grabs a whip from her SUV. 1 minute later, Violette starts violently whipping Bill as several FBI vans pull up. Bill then starts screaming in pain as Violette eats the whip. 10 seconds later, Bill is tased and placed in handcuffs. 10 seconds later, the flaming IKEA collapses. 5 seconds later, Bill is placed into a cop car as the IKEA gets fully doused. A few seconds later, Violette gets a court date for Bill's trial. Several weeks later, Bill is found guilty and sentenced to life in ADX Florence. The end.